Welcome back to Conversations with Boston School Psychologists, building safe and supportive schools one conversation at a time, where we spotlight the people, practices, and partnerships behind behavioral health in Boston Public Schools. I'm here with our Senior Director of Behavioral Health Services, Dr. Andria Amador, and today we're excited to welcome Dr. Sheila Desai. Dr. Desai is the Director of Equity and Inclusive Practices at the National Association of School Psychologists, a role she has held since 2017. She previously worked as a school psychologist in the Boston Public Schools for 4 years. She earned her PhD in counseling and school psychology from UMass Boston. She completed both her pre-doctoral internship and postdoctoral fellowship at EastCon in Connecticut. Sheila, thank you so much for being here. And can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, as well as how you ended up working at NASP? Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for that nice introduction. It's great to be here. So about me, I grew up in West Virginia. I went to college in Indiana. I was a psychology major. And during my undergrad studies, I had the opportunity to work with a professor who was studying how preschool age children develop their early number knowledge. And so that was kind of the start for me to understand the intersection between education and psychology. And I kind of figured out that school psychology was a natural fit. So I went to UMass Boston to get my specialist level degree right after undergrad. And then, as you said, I was in Boston Public Schools. That was my first position as a school psychologist. That's where my career started. So proudly held that position for 4 years and decided to go back to get my doctorate after that point. I at the time thought I would become a professor and also felt like it was really important to get actual work experience as a school psychologist before training others to be a school psychologist. And so I pursued my PhD. And then coincidentally, as I was finishing up my postdoc, this position at NASP came up. At the time, the position was Director of Educational Practice. So that's what I was hired for. And it was just luck, like right time, right place kind of thing. I did not foresee this being in my future, but I'm really glad that it worked out. And so here I am 8 years later.
That's great. And just to clarify, when did it change to Director of Equity and Inclusive Practices?
Sure. That was about a year ago. So my role kind of evolved a little bit over time. And as NASP took on more social justice work as an association, and that kind of fell in my portfolio, so to speak. And so we thought that this title better represented kind of the breadth of the work that I'm doing now.
That's fantastic. And so as the Director of Equity and Inclusive Practices at NASP, you lead several critical areas of work. Can you share some recommendations and resources from NASP for school psychologists who want to strengthen their culturally responsive practices?
Sure. So in terms of recommendations, I think the first step for school psychologists is really to engage in self-reflection, being aware of your biases. Everybody has them. So just being able to acknowledge that is just how everyone is. That's an important thing to acknowledge, as well as recognizing how power and privilege play a role at the individual level, at the community level, at systemic levels. And so being able to think about those pieces being at play for our students too. So only then, I think, once you have that awareness, can you engage in culturally responsive practices. And, that in general includes like validating the experiences of all students, their identities, their experiences, their culture, being able to help foster inclusive learning environments in our schools and a sense of belonging for all of our students too. As for resources, NASP has a number of resources on our website. We have a social justice page on our website, and there you can find a number of things. We've done a couple podcast series. A number of years ago, we had a social justice podcast series. More recently, we did one focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there's several episodes there. We also have some primers on topics like bias, on intersectionality, on privilege. So those are good places to start too. We also put out position statements on a number of topics. And so other places to learn, some of those position statements are on like serving LGBTQ plus youth, We have a separate one on serving trans and gender diverse youth. We have one on race and privilege and discrimination. We have one on serving multilingual students. So there's a number of statements that might be helpful to folks too. And then finally, I'll highlight we put out Best Practices Edition 7 recently. And in that set, there's a number of chapters that focus on culturally responsive practice in various topic areas like crisis response, children with depression or anxiety, violence prevention, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot out there.
Sheila, that's amazing. Thank you so much for doing such amazing work for NASP. And Andria, you've always been a strong advocate for culturally responsive practices in the Boston Public Schools. And I was hoping you could share how you put these practices into action.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we're here for our students, and our staff have to reflect the students we serve, including their culture and language. So one of the important things that we have done is spend a lot of intentional time on workforce and development by finding, training, recruiting, and hiring diverse school psychologists. And for districts to do that, we have learned that you can't just wait for the right school psychologist to show up in an application. You have to go out and actually recruit. So we've gone further upstream to build a workforce development model that we're training 50 graduate students a year. We're the largest training program in New England, and that allows us to be able to find really diverse and bilingual school psychologists while they're still being trained and get the opportunity to hire them before other districts even know that they're out there. And by doing that very intentionally for many years, we've been able to expand the diversity and in our department, both culturally and linguistically and racially. And so that's made a huge difference. But even that isn't enough because we know as a field, we need to increase awareness of our field to lots of people. And so we've also worked in the last several years with Dr. Barrett to really adopt and use the Exposure Project so that we're trying to go into our BPS schools, which have our students are very diverse and speak over 100 languages, and tell our own students about this field so they can become school psychs that we can then train and hire to actually continue to expand our diversity. So that's really a crucial part to this. And then, as Sheila said, we have lots of training to do. We all have a professional obligation to engage in culturally responsive practices, to engage in reflection, to be aware of the power that we hold as school psychologists in creating great schools, but also in the decisions we make for students. And so we have done a range of training. We have an equity committee that's committed to developing training standards, if you will, for us, and helps us define which areas we need to train school psychs in. For example, we had a year-long partnership and we learned about social justice in schools with Dr. Barrett. And then we've had trainings on calling in and calling out, understanding racism, understanding the history of racism in Boston. We're currently working with Dr. Brian McClure on hacking deficit thinking and how we approach our thinking about students. And so that work is not one and done. It's extensive. It should cross all areas of our practice, and we continue to learn and grow. And I just want to name it's also really important to me because my husband's from Honduras and my children are bicultural, biracial. And so I, at a very personal level, understand what it means to have to grow as a person and understand that my worldview that I grew up in is not everyone's worldview. And until I married someone from another culture, did I understand that our worldview frames how we interpret everything, every social interaction, every decision, every how we get information. And so that's helped open my eyes. And we as a department have embraced learning more about this and ensuring that we're engaging in culturally responsive practices. And I want to give, Sheila mentioned the incredible resources NASP have that I've benefited as a professional and our department has. I also want to give a shout out to the book clubs because NASP has incredible book clubs and they pick the great books, but they also have the template that they share with all NASP members. So we just started adopting NASP book club and NASP says a book, we buy it. I've got a couple behind me. And then school psychs get to participate in a book club as part of their required professional development. And it's been on a range of choices. We were really impacted profoundly by Enrique's journey. It tells a compelling story about an immigrant student and his lived experience. And the bonus for me is that he's Honduran, but it was a powerful, powerful book that was so powerful that the group that read it as their book study said our whole department has to read that. So it's going to be our entire department book read later in the year. So I just shout out to NASP for their leadership in this space.
Yes. And that's fantastic work, Andria. I don't think people realize just how diverse Boston is. We have so many different demographics there. I remember when I was working at the Murphy, it was a large Vietnamese community, but a lot of different diverse cultures, different languages. By the way, I did want to just share as a fun side note that, my wife is also from Honduras. So Andria and I have that little fun fact in common. Sheila, I'm not sure if you also have something like that in common. I'm not sure. That would be crazy if we all had spouses from Honduras. But Sheila...
Honduras, but also in like a multi-faith, multicultural...
A multicultural husband. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I knew that about you, Sheila, and I knew that about you, Tim, but that all three of us are in multicultural, multi-faith marriages. And it's right. Representative of our world. I think it's, it is how our world is, and how do we as a profession in school psychs respond to families, much like our own families that are in the schools. So that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And this is a good segue into asking about families. Sheila, how can school psychologists better engage families and communities in ways that are culturally responsive?
Sure. So school psychologists, of course, have an important role to play in this, but I also think it's really important that they're part of a team of folks in schools who are prioritizing the engagement with families. And I think, we can talk about the relationship with families, but relationships can also be negative. I think the important piece is really looking at families as partners and making sure that we make those families feel that they are an equitable partner in the process of supporting students and enabling students to succeed. So I think that's one piece at the fundamental level. And then I think it helps that we recognize that all families have strengths. I know, Andrea was mentioning like the deficit thinking that's easy to kind of fall back on, but recognizing that even if there are hurdles with communication or being able to reach folks, like knowing that those families still have strengths that they're bringing to the table. And then, finally, some like general practices around just ensuring that schools are warm, hospitable, inclusive spaces for everyone, whether that's in the signage or the communications or having translators available, whatever that might actually look like logistically, ensuring that everyone feels welcome in the school. And then finally, engaging in actions that go beyond some of those deliberate events that invite families in. So, of course, we're doing the parent-teacher conferences, or maybe everyone's doing back to school night, but are there other ways to invite families to the table, like having them on problem-solving teams, or how are we including them in the curriculum so that we can incorporate their values and culture into student learning, things like that.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sheila. And Andria, could you provide some ways that school psychologists in Boston are engaging families and communities?
Yeah, absolutely. As Sheila was talking, I'm thinking about the many things our district does. So I do think this is an area of strength at a district level. We have lots of opportunities and intentionality about parent engagement and for example, parents being on hiring teams. Parents sit on instructional leadership teams at a building level. Parents are on our school committee. Parents, we have a variety of parent events, but at the school psych role and building level, school psychs are doing a lot of amazing things. So one of the important things that we first do is having school psychologists that speak the language, and it's great if they're also from the same culture, having conversations with parents in their native language about education. The special ed process is really pivotal and so important. And when we have crisis events, we've also found it really important to have someone who understands how different people from different cultures and religions look at crisis and grief. And so we found it very, very important in that relationship whenever that's possible. But then there are specific ways in the duties school psychs perform. So doing parent interviews in the parent's language is very helpful. But when we don't have that language, then we do have access to translation and interpretation services. Every school psych can just call a number and get that support when they need it. We have purchased any materials that are available in another language. We purchase those. So rating scales that we can get in another language, universal screening, all of that's really important. Unfortunately, the market doesn't have every language we need, but I just wanted to name that that's an important thing school psychologists can do. And then I'll give you like a specific example at the building level. When we're buying materials for school psychs to use in their rooms, we're buying diverse materials. So we have books for kids in the languages the kids speak. We have puppets and toys and books that represent all of our kids, not just middle-class white kids with a dog, right? Like, how do we represent all of our kids in the materials that we use, the curriculum that we choose? And then school psychs are being very intentional as they do their MTSS and building culture. So for example, if you're working on culturally responsive PBIS, those norms in quality PBIS, those norms are developed by the students. And so they represent the students' value system and are culturally appropriate. So PBIS in one school may have symbolism that's important to the kids in that school. And another school will have a very different symbol, very different norms because it reflects them. And in some schools where most of the students speak a given language, our PBIS system will be in both languages. And I'll give a shout out to Jillian Archer, incredible school psych in Boston. In developing her PBIS, wanted parent feedback, as Sheila said. The parents are partners. And so Jillian set up a parent walkthrough of the PBIS system, and the walkthrough happened in Spanish because that's a primary language of her families. The materials were in Spanish. They invited parents in. They explained to them what PBIS was, what they were hoping to achieve, what the kids had come up with. And they invited them to walk through the school and do a walkthrough. And we often have administrators do that or principals do that, but give the parents the tool and say, do a walkthrough and judge us on how well we're doing at adopting these values. And so it takes time to do it in Spanish, to translate, to train the parents, to provide childcare and to give them food and welcome them in, but then have them not just be a person that attends, but is giving feedback. And so that was a labor of love, but it really helped the parents understand how they could support their child's development of their cell skills, but it made the school to be sure to include the values and feedback from the family. So that's a really specific example.
That's great. Those are all great initiatives, but I especially like the feedback from parents. And I think you both had really emphasized that, Sheila, as well in your answer when it comes to school psychologists with evaluations, involving the parents throughout the process, giving them their voice, making sure their voice is heard. And Andria, with your feedback about the school culture and school climate, making sure that their voice is heard in that as well. So that's fantastic. It sounds like there's a lot of congruency between NASP and between the Boston Public Schools. Sheila, I want to shift gears now to the comprehensive behavioral health model. So you were a school psychologist in BPS when that model, known as CBHM, was being created. This was back in around 2010. And so to put it in perspective for the audience, around that time that Sheila was working in Boston Public Schools, CBHM only had about 10 schools. It was a small pilot of 10 schools. And now in 2025, it's a district-wide model across all schools. And I just wanted to ask if you have any memories of when CBHM was just getting off the ground. What memories do you have of the initiative just getting started?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was working there, I was part of the steering committee that was kind of laying the groundwork. Andrea, I don't know if you have memories from the steering committee, but we were, starting to have those conversations with UMass Boston, with the hospital system, and starting to kind of think through what this might look like. And then to be able to come back as a doctoral practicum student a couple years later, when I think we were in cohort 2, maybe at the time when I came back as a student, and was able to be on the ground a couple days a week in an elementary school that was in, I believe, the second cohort of CBHM schools. And so it was really an exciting time to kind of see things get off the ground. I do remember, at least for me, there was a lot of excitement. I was early in my career, and we very much were doing kind of a traditional school psych role in terms of a high volume of special education assessment. I was doing a lot of crisis response, but the opportunity to do a much wider range of services was really exciting. I know there was also some resistance within our department. Change is hard. And so there was certainly a little bit of turmoil too. But going back to just being in an actual CBHM school, I think it was such an incredible opportunity to be able to help build like these MTSS and PBIS systems from the ground up. Both as a student getting that training experience as a doctoral student, but also being able to just see the growth within BPS coming from those two different perspectives of like the before and after CBHM was really cool.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a really pivotal moment there where school psychologists were shifting their role from just doing evaluations to now having this much more comprehensive role. And Andria, I was hoping you could expand on that, on how this CBHM initiative really changed the role of school psychologists from just testing to a much more comprehensive role.
Yeah. And it just makes me smile to think about those times where we were starting, because it was very exciting. It's exciting to say, we can do things better, and we can do things better for kids. And we knew Sheila was destined for great things because she was a new school psych, but realized there was a better way to do things. And, I'll dedicate my response to Stacy Skalski, one of my favorite people on earth, but also pivotal, absolutely critical to our success, both with the model, my professional success, our adoption of the practice model. So Stacy was one of the NASP leaders and staff members at the time who led the development of the NASP practice model. And when we heard about it in 2010, to Sheila's point, we're like, we know we can do better for kids than we're doing. And so we just pulled together a group that Sheila mentioned and said, who wants to do things differently? Let's join us and let's figure it out. And the challenging part for anyone, whether it was then or if you're just listening to this podcast and you want to figure out how you could start adopting the NASP practice model, is, a journey of a million miles starts with the first step. The first step was acknowledging we could do things better, and doing an inventory of our skills. And there's a lot of skills in the NASP practice model, and we had to figure out where were our places and areas of growth. And so as we began, we had to think about the system, but we also had to think about our professional skill deficits. Many of us had not been trained in an MTSS model or had not focused on intervention work in our training programs and our field experience. So we did a lot of training. And then we started small and we built from there. So if you're going to start this, you're not going to end up with a comprehensive model. You're going to start with enhancing what you're doing kind of step by step. And that context for us was we were doing too many evaluations, so we couldn't do interventions. So we wanted time to build interventions. In another district, it may mean you need more time for mental health services. Each district's unique. And so do that skills inventory, but also do a needs inventory for your district. We were lucky at the same time that we realized there was a better place to operate because of NASP. Our district was getting feedback from school leaders and teachers that the number one thing they needed help in was behavior and classroom management. And so the two worlds were very topical, and our model responded to that need. And it grew from there. And now we have adopted the NASP practice model as our job description for school psychologists. And I'll just say that not only are we, most importantly, helping students better, it's also really helped with job satisfaction. Because there are some people who like to test, and that's great. We need evaluations. But there's also people really interested in doing many other aspects of the role. And because we've adopted the practice model, they get to do that.
Absolutely. The full range of the practice model, including counseling, consultation, being more involved with interventions. It makes for a more fun day than just doing the same thing over and over again. But also, you had mentioned how you were getting tremendous feedback from other educators. I know you had said previously to me about how principals were starting to demand more time, saying we need more school psychologists because they're just doing such groundbreaking fundamental work here. And so once we evolved our role as school psychologists, suddenly there was all this advocacy for more school psychologists. And Andrea, if you want to talk about a little bit of that before we get into our next topic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this paradoxical situation where a lot of school psychs will say, I don't have time to do the expanded role. All I do is assessment. And I promise you, from my lived experience, if you start doing one more thing, you'll say, where is there time to do it? But as you expand it and people can see it, then they're advocating for you to have more people. And it's not just you saying, I need more school psychologists. And so it was tough, as Sheila said, to do all these evals and then say, okay, now you're going to be the facilitator of MTSS in your building. And people are like, what? I've never even had to present to staff before. And now I'm going to lead something in my building. So we had to kind of break up the skills, teach them, and adopt things slowly. But one of my first interactions with Stacy around the practice model, I said, this practice model requires a whole new skill set for school psychs that we need to name as a NASP volunteer. We need to name that and help support school psychologists. And one of them is leadership. So I'm very passionate about leadership. School psychologists are not experts who sit at the table with an opinion. School psychologists are leaders. They can lead change in their district. They can lead change in their buildings. And so right from the beginning, building those leadership skills and the communication and team facilitation skills that come with it have been critical to our success.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea, for expanding on that. Sheila, I want to ask more about your experience as a doc student in the Boston Public Schools. And if you could expand on that, you were a practicum student, correct, in the Boston Public Schools during that time. Would you like to expand on that part of your career?
Sure. So as a prac student, I was in a BPS elementary school 2 days a week for a full year. And that school was part of the CBHM cohort. And my recollection from that time is, we were, of course, building the kind of MTSS system. I remember supporting the school-wide screening using the BIMUS, and then, helping to look at all of that data and figuring out which students might need additional support, and really working with grade level teams in the schools to kind of figure out what those interventions might look like for some students or for individualized support. And I also was able to deliver some of those services myself as a prac student. So holding a social skills group with a group of, elementary age boys, in collaboration with another practitioner that was based at that school, and really doing a range of services, I think, for 2 days a week, being able to really help from everything from like the screening, as I was talking about, to the intervention piece. So it was a really unique opportunity at that time.
That's great. I'm glad you were given that dynamic role and had fond memories of that experience. Andrea, do you want to expand a little bit more on the DOC program and how we support students in the Boston Public Schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very proud that we're the only APICT approved school psych training program for doc students in Mass. And that was very critical for us because we wanted to hire doctoral level school psychologists, but we wanted them to have their training in schools, right? We need people to come that know how schools operate, but there were no sites. And so we worked with our university partners to develop a program that complied with APIC. And now we have that placement for both prac students, interns, and postdocs. But speaking about both doc students and specialist level students, they're critical to our success. And it's a win-win situation. By adopting the practice model and having the range of experiences Sheila described, enables us to provide a great learning experience. So the students benefit from that. And we benefit from all the extra capacity that we get. Students were able, especially in the early days, gave us more capacity to do things that we didn't have time for. And now that we do have more staff, they still enable us to do additional things. So from doing the things Sheila mentioned to like teaching cell lessons, supporting teachers and distributing materials on resources, implementing the PBIS reward system, helping do trainings. Students have been critical to our success, but they also, I want to say, bring that excitement that you heard Sheila talk about. So they help bring the excitement back to the field for the field supervisors they work with. And often students are bringing new skills that we haven't learned because they've just come out while the students in school. So we were learning at the time we were developing this, we were learning with our students. And now every day, students continue to teach us, including me, something that they're learning new. So a suggestion for anyone who wants to expand practice to also be developing a training program for your district. Even if you're the only person with an intern, you start, like Stacy said, you start and you move. And we had 0 students when I first started, and now we have 50. So students can be critical to your success, and they just make the job more enjoyable. It's wonderful to have university students.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. And it sounds like Boston Public Schools is doing phenomenal work for doc students and helping them really grow in their professional journey. So that's fantastic. And Sheila, we're now going to get back to you with something fun. We were hoping that you could share a Boston-themed fun fact about yourself. Go ahead.
Sure. So in my time in Boston, I actually was on a competitive dance team. We performed like a traditional Indian folk dance, and we competed around the country and in Canada. And the fun fact part is that our dance team was invited by the WWE to be an entourage for their Indian wrestler at the time. So we got to go into the ring and dance and kind of participate in this ridiculous skit with the wrestler. But it was definitely a memorable event and a fun fact.
Okay, we need a video. We need to post the video as
It's definitely out there.
or a photo. Where was this? What arena? What stadium?
Gosh, I think it was where the hockey happens, like by North Station. I'm forgetting the name of the actual.
I think it's TD Garden.
TD
The
Bank.
Garden.
Garden, Sheila? Wow.
That's impressive.
8 years since I lived there.
That is so cool.
One of the Celtics, the
Yes.
world champion Celtics.
Yeah, that's the one. The Garden.
That's awesome. That's huge. I'll go next.
I'm forgetting the Garden name.
Yeah, that's embarrassing. I got to cut that out.
I'll go next because mine's a quick one, and then we'll head to Andrea. They were filming a movie right by where my Northeastern University college dorms were, and so me and my friends were just walking by when we saw Dane Cook just finishing up doing some acting for a movie he was in, and he was just available to, like, there was really not too many people around. He was just available to talk to people, and so I got to meet Dane Cook personally in Boston, so that was nice. Fun memory, a little fun fact there. Andrea, do you have a Boston-themed fun fact?
All the movies happening in Boston, I have not had a famous person encounter. I'll say my fun fact is I came to Boston for the summer to work with the intention of being here for a summer. I got a job that ended up being the manager of a retail outlet, and I should have been suspicious that I have no retail experience. Why are they making me the manager? When I showed up for work, it was actually an outdoor push cart that you see on the streets that sell like T-shirts and peanuts, and so that's my first job in Boston, was being the manager of the retail push cart in downtown Crossing. And I looked to my right and saw the most beautiful man I had ever seen was the manager of the push cart next to me, and he became my husband. So
that's so sweet, Andrea. Well, Sheila, before we end, do you want to close on any last words of wisdom?
Oh gosh, words of wisdom. I think, change starts small. And so I'll remember something that Stacy shared with me during my interview at NASP, which was like, you don't have to move mountains, just move. And so I think that's like a really nice way to think about school psychology and how we can make small changes.
Well said. Thank you so much, Sheila. And thank you, the viewer, for listening to Conversations with Boston School Psychologists, building safe and supportive schools, one conversation at a time. Please follow us on our socials, Boston School Psychs, and visit our website, bostonschoolpsychs.com, to learn more about our work. Join our next conversation to learn more about resources and tips for creating safe and supportive schools. Thank you.